but there was a card there. Had a deer on the front, and this is the message that was on that card. Said, another year lived your life. That's something to celebrate, and so you may. Your loved mom, Miriam.
No, it wasn't your
That's
mother.
weird. So anyway, what I'd like to say is just a few words. I was born in 1936, and Miriam
I think
used
we all
to
know
tell
that.
me that she didn't think that I would ever live to be 88 years old.
No, I never told you that.
And so I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But there's a little story connected with that. When I was 19, I worked in a place 600 miles from the North Pole. There was 8 of us in the period, 4 Americans and 4 Canadians. And I was involved in meteorology, loading up balloons with hydrogen that we used to make, sending up instruments, recording what was going up to 18 miles and 150 miles blown out. And we had to do that within 3 hours, give it to the radio operators, and they would send it out, is what happened. So anyway, everything was going well until about July of my first year. And for some reason or other, I was having trouble walking with this side of my leg. And it began to hurt, and it began to hurt, and it was this extreme hurt. And finally, I was in bed, and I couldn't get up and walk. And anyway, they were able to come to talk to people who were down south on the ham radio, and they talked to a couple doctors, and they said it sounded like it could be appendicitis. And so anyway, that was that. But the radio operators got it off of the RCAF, and they said, well, possibly we can get in and pick this fellow up and take him out. But in the middle of July, the permafrost is beginning to melt. And when the permafrost melts, on the runway that we had, in the very middle of that airfield, it would ooze out muck. We couldn't get it out. And they weren't sure they would be able to land a Lancaster bomber there to get me out. And then those Lancasters that they were using there was to see what the Russians were using that were flying over the north, because what they wanted to know is what's going on up here in this country. And they were using the Lancasters to explore and see this was their sovereignty, is what they wanted to do. So anyway, finally it was decided that they would send in an airplane and see if they could make it land.
See over there?
So it was a Lancaster bomber. It had a crew on board of 6 people. There was no guarantee it was going to be able to land safely, and there was no guarantee that it would be able to take off if it had a lot of muck coming up underneath it didn't have any, what would call them, things that would keep mud off the aircraft. If it come up on the wings, what you were going to have was a tremendous weight for these 4 motors. So the guys that were at the station went down, brought up the crew, had hot coffee for them. They were sitting around having a little chat to see what they felt should do. They were trying to decide if one person's life would be worth 6 more. And this is the way the conversations was going. And I wasn't sure, but maybe I was going to die right there in that place. I was 19 years old, and I wasn't sure I was going to get out. Well, here's another part of that little story. When they built that station there, they brought in a couple of Inuit, or we called them Eskimos, and there was one little family to show them how to live in the Arctic. And they had a little girl who was about 5 years old who died. And after her death, the boys that were working at the station, they went up on the mountainside and built a cairn for her, and there she was. And I had gone up for 4 to 5 times just for a hike, and I thought, I'm probably next. That's what I thought. And anyway, to make a long story short, what they did, they put me on a big stretcher, they took me down, they put me in the Lancaster bomber, my head was put in here, I could see out the window, I was all strapped in, everybody was in their position, and we started off down the runway. We knew when we came to the crossbow because we began to do this, and we couldn't seem to get any more speed out of that aircraft. And finally, we got past that, and when we got to the end, it began to pick up a bit. And the captain on that airplane, when he came to the end, he turned that big bomber around like this and turned around that mountain, and he come down and he made a complete stop. And I ended up, to make a long story short, they took me to Resolute Bay, didn't want to go south because the weather was bad, took me over to Greenland Thule, and there 2 doctors took me and put me in a hospital and took my appendix out immediately. And I've thought so many times, the Americans flew me back up a month later and took me back to that station to work. And I went up to see that little girl, and I thought so much about it. And I thought, you know, I'm going to live. And I believe that, you know, that I wasn't afraid of dying. And I haven't been afraid of dying ever since. If I died here today, how sick and fell down here, don't feel sorry for me. I just got the feeling that I'll never be afraid of dying. And I had a good life since then. And if 2000,
Amen.
if I'm looking at it carefully and I think, you know, what is this going to be like the next years at age 80? I'll take what comes and be
88,
perfectly
or 88.
satisfied. So I want to thank you all for coming here today and celebrating my birthday. And I hope you really enjoyed coming to the Garden of Eden. And I particularly want to thank Linda, where is she? Right there, and Bruce, for everything they have done around this property when you look at it and see what it looks like. It's like when you read about the Garden of Eden, it's significant what they've done here. It's an outstanding job, but I'll tell you one thing, it's really fun to visit and come here. So I thank you all for coming there. It was nice of you to come and join, and I'm pleased about the way you feel. Thank you very much.
We're very happy to be here.